Palantir has bankrupted a company. And I don't mean this in the literal sense, but I do mean this in the sense of the company that is going bankrupt, which is Vice Media, once valued at $5.7 billion, now declaring for bankruptcy, has covered companies like Palantir in a way that has ultimately led them to their bankruptcy. It is the way in which this media company has decided to have a view on the world and the sort of imposition of values it has imposed on its readers through clickbait sensationalism and, frankly, not correct journalism when actually analyzing the deeply philosophical questions that arise when valuing and understanding a company like Palantir, that has led to readers not trusting the company, advertisers not wanting to advertise with the company, and ultimately them not getting enough traffic or attention. And if you're a media company, that's what you have to get to stay relevant. And that's why they're going bankrupt. Now, if you are a Palantir shareholder or someone who has cared about Palantir for a long time, you probably know about Vice Media. Vice Media has written articles, countless articles over the past 5-6 years about Palantir. I want to go through a couple of them, and then I want to go through the article they just put out around 6 days ago on Palantir. And 6 days ago, they write, a misleading article about Palantir. 6 days later, they go bankrupt. It's kind of just like, wow, the fact that that stuff can happen when you don't actually care about the journalism you're putting out. So meme stock traders, this is on June 6, 2022, ecstatic after Palantir teases Ukraine war involvement. Palantir to the moon, one commenter said. This is Doom Shalat. Shout out to him if you know him in the Palantir community. He always comments Palantir to the moon. This article was really, really interesting because essentially they go into all the quote unquote bad things about Palantir. And then they say, this is a meme stock and a bunch of people, this is why I'm investing in Palantir. I'm buying all the dip all the way down. They're essentially making fun of the people that were so ecstatic about the Ukraine news. And what's interesting to me is the coverage of how Vice decided to display why Palantir's involvement in the Ukraine war was basically from their perspective, bad thing. Why were shareholders excited? Because a country that is being decimated by another force that is invading them, that is threatening the very fabric of their sovereignty, has decided to use a software to protect themselves. Not tactical nuclear weapons, because that's how bad it could get, but a software to figure out how to defend themselves and defend their sovereignty against a dictatorial and authoritarian state. And the fact that that is generally agreed upon to be a good thing, you don't want China invading Taiwan, you don't want the United States invading someone, you don't want Russia invading Ukraine, because that sets a horrible precedent for what they could do to Poland and Lithuania and all the other Baltic states. You want that to end. And if there's one company in the world who's providing the software infrastructure, the actual artificial intelligence to be able to help them on the battlefield to stop that from happening, one would argue that that company is doing something ethical. But to Vice Media, it's just, no, all war is bad, all this is bad, it's just, evil spy company. It's like, the reality of the world is that a lot of these things are inevitable. This is a deglobalized society. We want fairy tales and rainbows. In the real world, you don't get fairy tales and rainbows because there are bad actors. And when those bad actors do bad things, if you don't have the software in today's day and age to protect yourself, there's a lot more death. There's a lot more bad things that happen as a result of that. But that wasn't the coverage. The coverage was it's a meme stock and, people shouldn't be excited for the fact that it's going up. Another article from 2019, they say Karp isn't a progressive, CEO of Palantir. He's a capitalist concerned with preserving his company's position as the data analytics platform that powers a lot of the Western world. Karp's rhetoric about progressive values is like the rest of Palantir's business model, a product meant to make you feel good about the horrible things being done behind the veil. Let's talk about this before we get into the final article that was, I guess, the nail in the coffin that led to Vice going bankrupt. It's very interesting to see media outlets cover Palantir in this way. And, if you're a Palantir shareholder, I think it's incredibly important to understand the way the media covers the company, because that can make or break. I mean, we saw Facebook at it. There's an FTC ruling today that they're not allowed to profit off data coming from teens. I mean, that's a lot of the data on the platform. Like, these things, politics is inextricably tied to the nature of the company. And this is why I'm happy Peter Thiel came out publicly last week and said he's not supporting Donald Trump explicitly. He's not supporting any Republican candidate, because that just ties Peter Thiel to the Palantir brand, Trump to the Palantir brand, and then if you don't like Trump, boom, you don't like Palantir. And so I'd rather, the CEO or not the CEO, but the chairman and founder of the company be a little bit more apolitical as a shareholder. So politics definitely affects the company. What Karp is saying is that, look, When he says he's progressive, what he means is that he believes Western freedoms should be kept intact. It's like this new phenomena that's going on in the world where people who say they are progressive, but then they're against freedom of speech, I don't understand it. This idea that you can codify in law certain words that should or should not be said is ridiculous. It is absolutely insane that in the United States of America, we're having a discussion on, hey, we should ban hate speech. Well, what the hell is hate speech? How can we define hate speech? And more importantly, who gets to define hate speech? And so when Karp says he's a progressive trying to defend Western values, and by the way, he supports higher taxes, he supports more of a socialist economy. So from an economic perspective, he's a lot more progressive than people give him credit for. But progressive in the sense of, hey, freedoms, the civil liberties, these values, they matter. And so when the Vice article in relationship to what he was doing or what Palantir Software was doing with immigration is saying, oh, Karp says he's progressive, but at the end of the day, all they want to do is deport families and their technology is being used for bad things. Karp's response to this is that these are incredibly hard philosophical questions. Because when you've got an administration that wants to protect the sovereignty of their own country, that wants to have legal immigration, that wants to be able to make sure jobs aren't taken away, that, there's a countless reasons for why you would want legal immigration and you don't want tons of illegal people coming into the country. There's like very sound economic cases and moral arguments for that. But then you've got to pair that with the actual deportation of those people. When they get into the country, what do you do with those people, right? Do you just separate them from their families? How do you deport them? These are philosophical questions that are complex. And anyone who says it's not complex has no idea what's going on in the world. To say, oh, this is a black or white thing, or there's an answer for this. Like, no, it's not. It is complex. And the one thing that I've appreciated as being a shareholder of Palantir is recognizing how complex these philosophical questions are. They are incredibly important to analyze from every perspective. And Palantir is a software company that says, look, we are going to build as much ethics as we can build into the implementation of our software to try to analyze these from multiple perspectives. But at the end of the day, we want to protect Western values. And if the administration at the time, the Trump administration, says this is the policy that we are going to go down in order to protect the sovereignty of the nation, Palantir can't just become blue or red at that moment. They've got to follow the values that is being imposed. Now, they have had some restrictions, right? So when Trump says, let's do a Muslim ban and build a database of all the Muslims, that sounds pseudo-fascist, right? That sounds like, hey, we're going to, that sounds ridiculous. And Karp and Palantir have explicitly said, we are not going to do that because that is something that crosses the line. But illegal immigration absolutely does not cross the line. These are really complex moral questions and economic questions to think about. There's a reason we don't have open borders across the entire world. And so the idea that Palantir is just following sort of the policy that hundreds of millions of Americans voted for, and now they're branded as this spy company, makes no sense. The other reason this doesn't make any sense in regards to immigration and what was going on with ICE is because Obama was the one who gave them their biggest contracts. People don't realize Obama deported more immigrants than Trump, but because of the virtue signaling we have, and because Trump did things, honestly, a lot less lighter than Obama did, but he's a Republican, Obama's a Democrat, we overshadow those things. And that is exactly the type of journalism that Vice Media has protected over the past couple of years. This idea that if you are to the right or center, or you're not enough to the left, you're not quote unquote progressive enough, you are then tainted as this fascist company, this fascist CEO, this fascist person that doesn't actually care about defending values. When in the irony is the idea that you care about Western values, you care about freedom of speech, you care about not overstepping your boundaries, that is the most progressive that you can actually become. This was the final article that they put out just days before they went bankrupt. Title was Palantir demos AI to fight wars, but says be totally ethical. It says it will be totally ethical. Don't worry about it. So they get into what is the defense AIP software. And then this is where I think the article gets into just a bad spot, right? Palantir's pitch is, of course, incredibly dangerous and weird. While there is a human in the loop in the AIP demo, they seem to do little more than ask the chatbot what to do and approve its actions. Drone warfare has already abstracted warfare, making it easier for people to kill vast distances with the push of a button. The consequences of those systems are well documented. In Palantir's vision of the military future, more systems would be automated and abstracted. Now, let's talk about this before we get deeper into the article. This is where the journalists that are working for Vice really just have zero clue on actually analyzing what's going on. If I could tell you that drone-based warfare in the context of the artificial intelligence platform that Palantir created for defense was actually more effective at reducing casualties because technology, the stuff that's accelerating at hyperscale, is more accurate, more efficient, more effective, less bureaucratic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are less casualties, there are, one could argue no casualties because of how specific and how targeted it is that a better option than actually going onto the battlefield and doing the stuff that you need to do? Which one is a better option? To me, it's very simple. The thing that kills less people. But because we don't want to embrace certain forms of technology, because we want to have these myths and these facades in our head about how we think about technology, because we want to think, oh, AI drone warfare, boom, that company's fascist, that company's evil, when in reality, drone warfare has existed for a long time. It existed under the Democratic administrations just as much as existed under Republican administrations. Then we decide to taint that company as a bad company, as a company that doesn't know what it's doing. To me, that's ridiculous, because if technology is actually enabling us to not have to kill more people, to be more effective, to have countries have a fighting chance against other countries that have nuclear weapons that are trying to invade them, i.e. Ukraine, Russia, and don't get started on what's going to happen with China, Taiwan. The president of Taiwan came out the other day and said, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when they're going to invade. Like, what do you want in that situation? And the biggest gripe I have with these people who write these articles is that they don't take a second to recognize how privileged they are. The fact that you live in the United States, the fact that we have tech companies that are able to build this software and protect our freedoms and then export it to other Western countries to help them protect their freedoms, which is why Palantir has just developed a regional tech hub in the Ministry of Defense in Lithuania. Why? Because Lithuania is part of the Baltic states, and they realize, hey, if this Ukraine shit goes south, we're up next. And we need something to make sure we don't get invaded. Like, this is the reality. But because we live in America, because these vice journalists probably live in a fancy little New York City or San Francisco apartment, get their Starbucks every morning, they don't think about these things. And I used to be the same. And as I've invested in Palantir and discovered and learned more about it, I'm like, wait a second, these are things that actually matter. These are things that we have to take into account when it comes to an investment thesis from a moral and ethical position. And from an economic position, because at the end of the day, if you can get this stuff done, there are financial benefits to it. But there's only financial benefits because you're actually providing something of value at the end of the day. They then go into the article and says, what Palantir is offering is the illusion of safety and the control of the Pentagon as it adopts AI. LLMs and algorithms must be controlled in this highly regulated environment. According to Palantir, this control involves 3 pillars. Then they go into it. And then they say what AIP does not walk through is how it plans to deal with the various pernicious problems of LLMs and what the consequences might be in the military context. AIP does not appear to offer solutions to those problems beyond frameworks and guardrails. This is also hilarious to me because, look, it's good to call out new technology and new software that maybe do things in a manipulated way. It's 100% the job of journalists to do that. I agree. The problem is they didn't do their research. I mean, they just did not do their research. If you actually looked up Palantir AI and ethics, they wrote like an 8-minute blog explaining every single point in detail for how they think about this. If you go through the company's entire history, 20 years has been built on the back of how do we protect civil liberties. If they did any research on how many terrorist attacks were stopped in Europe, which would have made Europe even more far right, which could have led to even more nationalism and things of that nature, it would be surprising to them because Palantir software, because of how it cares about civil liberties, ethics, privacy, and data management at scale, would have allowed those things to not happen and was the reason a lot of those things didn't happen. And like, this is the research that is involved when you're covering a company like this. But it's easy to say, oh, the company is unethical. The company is named after something from the Lord of the Rings. The company, you don't do 2 seconds of research of the things they've actually stopped with their tech, the things that they've been able to do in the world, the things that they've been able to actually make sure it doesn't happen to make the state less authoritarian, because the basic argument here is that when a terrorist attack happens, the state becomes more authoritarian because now they have a justification. This is what happened with the Patriot Act after 9/11 to invade your privacy. Why? Because they can say, hey, the safety of the state requires that we invade your privacy, because if we don't invade your privacy and you pull a terrorist attack, then that's a worse trade-off from a utilitarian perspective. So they violate your agency in order to protect the state. Well, if you stop terrorist attacks, you stop the state from having a justification to violate your agency. That is the entire justification that Palantir has given, and Alex Karp has so eloquently explained for why protecting civil liberties, why being able to stop terrorist attacks, why giving the software to governments, why being able to enable it in the most complex and nuanced ways is important. And like that one paragraph that I said right there, you could write articles and articles and articles about that one paragraph to counteract the claims that Vice Media is giving. But unfortunately, they didn't want to do that research. They didn't want to go deeper. They didn't want to understand that stuff. And look, let me give some credit to Vice. They've done great reporting on human rights. They've done great investigative journalism. I think their video content has been decent in terms of discovering that stuff and helping people understand it. But the reason they're heading to bankruptcy is because they did not do the things that were needed to be done in order to actually cover content in a meaningful way. And the way I know this is because people aren't reading, people aren't watching, they're just not consuming as much. And as a media company, if people aren't reading and watching and consuming, then your media company doesn't exist. And you've got to be creating relevant content that gets people to care, that gets people to want to listen, that gets people to do this. And I think a lot, honestly, final take here, I think a lot of people are tired. A lot of people are so tired of the sensationalism of everything being racist, of everything being this, everything being that, of just like, you know, let's forget about everything. Let's not have free speech. And the coverage of Palantir by Vice Media has essentially been that. Let's brand them as an evil company, write a quick 5-minute article, do no research, even though we were a media company that's valued at over almost $6 billion at one point. And let's just not care. Let's put it out because it'll get clicks. And a lot of those articles rank very high on Google if you type in Palantir and they show up, and that creates the brand of the company. And that's just not good for Palantir at the end of the day. But it seems like Vice Media might not be posting those articles anymore because their journalism, and again, some journalism there was good, but a lot of it ended up just being this clickbait stuff on Palantir. Is not going to hold up the test of time. So those are my thoughts. Palantir and the way it was covered ultimately led, because not a lot of people cared that much about that coverage anymore, to the bankruptcy of Vice Media. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.